The gunshot rang out like thunder in the narrow Chicago alley, freezing me in place as the man in the suit crumpled to the wet pavement, his blood mixing with the rain. Before I could process what I'd just seen, a voice snarled from the shadows. "Hey, you, get him." And I bolted, heart pounding, knowing that witnessing this gang execution had just made me the next target. My sneakers slapped against the slick concrete as I weaved through the late-night crowds on Michigan Avenue, the city lights blurring into streaks of neon. Rain soaked my shirt, but I didn't slow down. My name is Benjamin Hayes, 28, an accountant at a mid-sized firm in the Loop who spent most evenings buried in spreadsheets to avoid thinking about the parts of myself I'd buried even deeper. My parents in the suburbs still asked every Sunday call when I was bringing a nice girl home for dinner. I'd perfected the art of vague answers and polite smiles, all while the truth gnawed at me like an open wound. Tonight, I'd slipped into a quiet bar on the north side, hoping to test the waters, only to chicken out after one drink and head home early. Now that hesitation had cost me everything. Footsteps pounded behind me, closer than before. I cut left into a service alley behind a row of restaurants, lungs burning, and slammed into a tall figure stepping out of a side door. Strong hands caught my shoulders before I could fall. "Whoa, easy there," the man said, his voice steady amid the chaos. Blue eyes locked onto mine under the dim security light, and for a split second the world narrowed to just that calm gaze. "You look like death is chasing you." "Literally. They killed someone," I gasped, chest heaving. "I saw it. They saw me." His expression shifted from concern to something sharper. Without another word, he pulled me through the door into the warm glow of a nearly empty 24-hour diner. The waitress barely glanced up from her phone. "Jasper," he introduced himself quickly, guiding me past the counter into a narrow hallway that led to the back exit. "And you?" "Benjamin," I whispered, still shaking. Jasper didn't waste time. He grabbed a set of keys from a hook, pushed open the rear door, and motioned for me to follow. "My truck's 2 blocks over. Move fast, stay low." We sprinted through the rain, the distant sirens mixing with the roar of traffic. I kept expecting a bullet to find my back any second. When we reached an old black pickup parked under a flickering street lamp, Jasper shoved me into the passenger seat and peeled out onto the street before I even buckled in. "Where are we going?" I asked, voice cracking. "Anywhere but here for now," he answered, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. "You're not dying on my watch, Benjamin." As the city lights faded behind us on the interstate, the weight of what I'd witnessed settled like lead in my stomach. I had no ID on me, no phone, everything left behind in the panic. My life as I knew it was gone. And yet, sitting beside this stranger who'd risked himself without hesitation, a tiny crack of something unfamiliar opened inside me. Not just fear, something warmer, something dangerous in its own way. We drove through the night, stopping once at a gas station outside Joliet, where Jasper bought burner phones and snacks with cash. "Rule 1, he said as we pulled away again. "No credit cards, no names if we can help it. These guys don't play." He didn't ask for details yet, and I didn't offer them. Instead, he talked about the weather, about how Chicago winters made him miss California, anything to keep my mind from spiraling. His voice was low and even, the kind that made the truck cab feel smaller and safer than it had any right to. By the time the sky lightened to a bruised gray over the Illinois cornfields, exhaustion pulled at me like gravity. I leaned my head against the cool window and watched the miles blur past. Jasper glanced over once, his profile sharp against the dawn. "Get some sleep if you can. We've got a long road ahead." I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come easy. Every time the tires hummed over a seam in the highway, I heard that gunshot again. And every time I saw Jasper's steady hands on the wheel, I wondered why a complete stranger had just upended his own life to save mine. The question lodged itself in my chest like a second heartbeat, steady and impossible to ignore. We crossed into Indiana before noon, the flat farmland stretching endlessly on either side. Jasper pulled into a roadside motel that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 90s. 2 hours, he said, paying cash for a single room with 2 queens. Then we move again. Inside, the air smelled of old carpet and bleach. I sat on the edge of one bed, knees bouncing, while he checked the locks and drew the curtains tight. Only then did he turn to me. Tell me exactly what you saw. I did, voice trembling at first, then gaining strength as the words spilled out. The argument, the gun, the body hitting the ground. The face of the shooter burned into my memory like a brand. Jasper listened without interrupting, his jaw tight. When I finished, he nodded once. Sounds like the Marconi crew. Bad news. You're lucky you ran when you did. Lucky. I laughed bitterly. My life is over. Not if I can help it. He pulled 2 burner phones from the bag and handed me one. Keep it off unless it's an emergency. We'll figure out next steps after we both get some real sleep. I lay back on the stiff mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling. Jasper took the other bed, but I could feel him watching the door, alert even as his breathing slowed. For the first time in hours, the adrenaline ebbed enough for the deeper fear to surface, not just of the men chasing me, but of everything I'd been running from long before tonight. The secret I'd carried since I was 15, the one my parents would never accept, the one that made every holiday dinner feel like walking a tightrope. Jasper's voice drifted across the dark room, soft but clear. Whatever you're thinking right now, Benjamin, it's not the end. Trust me on that. I didn't answer. But for the first time in years, I wanted to believe someone. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains in thin gray strips, and I woke to the smell of cheap coffee. Jasper was already up, scrolling on his burner with a focused frown. He looked different in daylight, taller somehow, shoulders broad under a faded black hoodie, blonde hair still damp from a quick shower. When he noticed me stirring, he offered a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. You snore when you're exhausted, he said lightly, handing me a paper cup. Drink. We leave in 20. I sat up, the reality of yesterday crashing back like a wave. My hands shook around the cup. Did they find anything yet? News is calling it a robbery gone wrong, Jasper answered, voice low. But the Marconi family doesn't leave loose ends. We need distance. He paused, studying me. You got anyone you can trust? Family? Friend? The question hit harder than I expected. My parents would panic, then demand explanations I wasn't ready to give. My older sister had moved to Seattle years ago and barely kept in touch. And my so-called friends from work? They joked about finding the right girl every happy hour. No one, I admitted. Not for this. Jasper nodded like he understood more than I'd said. Then it's you and me for now. He tossed me a clean t-shirt from a plastic bag he must have bought while I slept. We're heading west. Smaller towns, less cameras. The next hours blurred into highway hypnosis. We crossed into Illinois again briefly, then angled south through Missouri. Jasper kept the radio low, switching stations whenever the news came on. Between miles, he told me bits about himself. Bartender by night, amateur photographer by day. Originally from a small town in Oregon where being gay had meant keeping his head down until he was 18 and finally left for the city. Didn't expect to be playing road trip hero, he said with a wry grin. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs. I found myself watching him more than the scenery. The way his fingers drummed the wheel when he was thinking, the quiet confidence in how he handled each rest stop like he'd done this before. Around lunchtime, we pulled into a truck stop diner outside Springfield. While Jasper ordered burgers to go, I stepped outside to stretch my legs and immediately regretted it. A black SUV with tinted windows idled at the far pump. My stomach dropped. I ducked back inside, heart racing. They're here, I whispered when Jasper returned with the bags. His face hardened, but he didn't panic. Back door. Now. We slipped through the kitchen, ignoring the cook's startled shout, and sprinted across the gravel lot to the truck. Tires spun as we peeled out, the SUV lurching after us seconds later. Jasper drove like he was born for it, cutting across lanes, taking exits at the last second, losing them somewhere in a maze of county roads. When the mirrors finally stayed clear, he exhaled sharply. That was too close. We ditched the interstate for backroads after that, the landscape shifting to rolling hills and dense woods. By late afternoon, we found a cabin rental listed on a no-name website, paid cash through a third party, and arrived at a small A-frame tucked behind pines in southern Missouri. Inside smelled of pine cleaner and old wood. 2 bedrooms, a wood stove, and a view of nothing but trees. For the first time since the alley, I felt something close to safe. That night we built a fire and sat on opposite ends of the worn couch. The silence stretched until Jasper broke it. You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to, Benjamin. But if we're doing this, running together, I need to know what I'm protecting. I stared into the flames. The words came out halting at first. How I'd known since high school, but never acted on it. How my dad's lectures about being a man still echoed in my head. How every date with women felt like wearing someone else's skin. Jasper listened, really listened, his expression never shifting to pity or judgment. When I finished, he simply said, "Takes guts to carry that alone this long." Then he shared more of his own story, coming out at 19, losing his family's support, building a chosen family in Chicago bars and art collectives. The way he spoke made the room feel less like a hideout and more like a confessional. For the first time, I felt seen, not as the scared accountant who'd stumbled into a nightmare, but as Benjamin, the man I'd been too afraid to become. Later, as we each headed to our rooms, Jasper paused in the hallway. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you're not facing it alone anymore." I closed my door and leaned against it, pulse steady for the first time in days. The fear was still there, sharp and real, but alongside it something new had taken root. A connection I hadn't known I was starving for. And that terrified me almost as much as the men still hunting us. The next 3 days settled into a strange rhythm. Mornings started with coffee on the cabin porch while Jasper checked news on the burner. No arrests, no mentions of witnesses. Only a vague police statement that the investigation was ongoing. Each update tightened the knot in my chest. Afternoons we hiked the surrounding trails, never straying far, always keeping the cabin in sight. Jasper carried a small camera, snapping shots of light filtering through leaves or deer crossing the path. "Helps me remember there's still beauty out here," he explained once. I started opening up in pieces. Over dinner one night, pasta cooked on the ancient stove, I told him about the family pressure, the way my mother still forwarded me dating profiles of daughters of her church friends. Jasper laughed softly, not at me, but with me, and shared how his own mother had cried for weeks when he left home, only to send a birthday card years later with no return address. The conversation flowed easier than any I'd had in years. But tension simmered beneath the surface. On the fourth night, I woke to the sound of Jasper pacing in the living room. I found him staring at his phone, jaw clenched. "What is it?" I asked. He hesitated, then turned the screen toward me. "A Chicago news alert. Another body found, same neighborhood." "They're cleaning house," he said quietly. "Means they're still looking for you." The fear I'd managed to push down roared back. I sank onto the couch, head in my hands. Jasper sat beside me, close enough that our knees brushed. "We can't stay here forever," he said. "But running blind gets people killed. We need a plan." We talked until dawn, possible routes to the West Coast, how to get new IDs, whether to risk contacting authorities. Jasper's calm logic anchored me, but every decision felt like stepping closer to a cliff. When the sun finally rose, I noticed how tired he looked, shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. He was sacrificing his own life for a stranger. The realization settled heavy in my chest. The misunderstanding came 2 days later. While Jasper was out gathering firewood, I picked up his camera to scroll through the photos he'd taken. Most were landscapes, but one folder stopped me cold, an older series of a man with dark hair and tattoos, laughing in the same diner where Jasper had first helped me. The captions were intimate. "Alex at sunrise, Alex after the storm." My stomach twisted. Was this all some rebound game? Was I just the next lost soul Jasper collected? When he returned, I confronted him, voice sharper than I intended. "Who's Alex?" Jasper froze, then set the wood down slowly. "Someone who left when things got hard," he answered quietly. 3 years ago. I kept the photos because they reminded me not to repeat the same mistakes. He met my eyes without flinching. "But you're not a mistake, Benjamin. Not even close." The air between us thickened. I wanted to believe him, but the old fears whispered louder. That night we barely spoke. I lay awake replaying every moment, wondering if the warmth I'd felt was real or just survival talking. Jasper's presence in the next room felt both comfort and threat. The next morning he made breakfast in silence, then handed me a fresh cup of coffee. "I'm not here because I feel sorry for you," he said simply. "I'm here because the second you ran into me, something clicked. Like the universe finally handed me someone worth fighting for." His words cracked something open inside me. I set the cup down and stepped closer. I've never let anyone see the real me, I admitted. Not like this. Jasper's hand found mine, warm and steady. Then start now. We didn't kiss. Not yet. But the touch lingered long after he let go, a promise neither of us was ready to name. Outside, the woods whispered with wind, and for the first time the future didn't feel like pure terror. It felt possible. That possibility shattered at dusk. A black SUV cruised slowly past the gravel road leading to the cabin. We killed the lights and watched from the window as it circled back once, then disappeared. Jasper's face was grim. They're closing in. We leave at first light. We packed in silence, the fragile piece we'd built suddenly fragile again. As I zipped my bag, I realized the biggest danger wasn't the men outside. It was the man inside, the one who was teaching me how to hope, and how much that hope could cost us both. We drove west before sunrise, the truck's headlights cutting through thick fog. Jasper took back roads through Arkansas and Oklahoma, avoiding interstates like they were minefields. Every few hours we switched drivers so he could rest, but neither of us slept much. The misunderstanding from the night before still hung between us, unspoken but present in the careful distance we kept. I wanted to apologize, to explain the panic that had made me lash out, but the words stuck. Somewhere in the Texas Panhandle, we stopped at a dusty truck stop for gas and supplies. While Jasper filled the tank, I wandered inside and bought 2 prepaid phones with more minutes. On impulse, I called my sister in Seattle. She answered on the second ring, voice thick with sleep. Ben, it's 4 a.m. Here. What's wrong? I told her the bare minimum. Witnessed something bad, had to disappear for a while. She didn't press, just said, whatever you need, little brother. But you sound scared. Call me when you can. Hanging up left me hollow. I'd left out the part about Jasper, about the feelings I could no longer deny. Back in the truck, Jasper noticed my silence. Family, he asked gently. Yeah. She's the only one who might understand someday. I hesitated, then added, I didn't tell her about you. He nodded, eyes on the road. When you're ready. Or never. Your call. The miles rolled on. In New Mexico, the landscape opened into red rock and endless sky, and something in me shifted. We pulled over at a scenic overlook at sunset, the kind of place tourists photographed. Jasper grabbed his camera, and for the first time in days I saw him relax. He snapped shots of the horizon, then turned the lens on me without asking. Smile like you mean it, he teased. I did. And for a moment the weight lifted. That night we rented a cheap room outside Albuquerque. 2 beds again, but when the lights went out I heard Jasper turn toward me. Benjamin, he said into the dark, I'm not Alex. I won't run when it gets hard. I swallowed hard. I know. I'm sorry I doubted you. The bed creaked as he sat up. Come here. I crossed the small space between us and sat on the edge of his mattress. His hand found mine again, then moved to my cheek, thumb brushing away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. You don't have to be strong every second, he whispered. Not with me. We stayed like that until sleep finally took us, hands still linked. No grand declarations, just quiet acceptance that felt bigger than any kiss could have been. The betrayal hit 2 days later in Arizona. We'd reached Flagstaff, thinking we'd found breathing room. Jasper went to buy groceries while I stayed at the motel, checking news on the burner. A text came through on my old number, somehow still active, from my college roommate Marcus. Dude, cops came by asking about you. Said you witnessed something big. Call me, I can help. Relief flooded me. Marcus had always been the loyal one. I called from the burner. He answered immediately. Ben, where are you? I told the cops I hadn't heard from you, but they're watching my place. Just come in, man. They'll protect you. Something in his voice felt off, too eager. I stalled, said I'd think about it, and hung up. When Jasper returned, I told him. His face went pale. Marcus was the one who introduced you to that bar the night it happened, right? I nodded slowly. The realization landed like ice. Marcus had been pushing me to loosen up for months. What if he'd been working both sides? We packed in under 5 minutes and left Flagstaff heading north into the mountains. Hours later, a local news alert popped up. Witness sought in Marconi murder. Possible accomplice in custody. Marcus's face filled the screen. He'd flipped. Sold me out for whatever deal the feds offered. Jasper pulled over on a deserted forest road, engine idling. They know your name now. We have to assume they know about me too. I stared out at the pines, betrayal burning in my throat. I trusted him. Jasper reached over and squeezed my shoulder. Then trust me instead. That night, in a tiny cabin near the Grand Canyon, we sat by the fire again. The betrayal had stripped away the last of my defenses. I told Jasper everything. The nights I'd cried alone after family dinners, the years of pretending, the way meeting him had cracked the walls I'd built. When I finished, he pulled me into his arms without a word. We stayed like that until the fire burned low. No rush, no pressure. Just two men holding on to each other while the world tried to tear everything apart. The Grand Canyon at dawn looked like the edge of the world. We stood on a quiet overlook, wind whipping our jackets, and for a moment the chase felt distant. Jasper's arm brushed mine as he pointed out a hawk circling below. Life keeps going, he said softly, even when ours feels like it's ending. I turned to him, the rising sun painting his face gold. I don't want to run anymore. He nodded. Then we stop running and start fighting smart. The plan took shape over the next 2 days. Jasper had an old friend in Las Vegas who owed him a favor, a retired detective who could help us reach the FBI with the description I remembered. We drove south through the desert, the heat shimmering off the highway like a mirage. Every mile closer to the city tightened the knot in my stomach, but Jasper's steady presence kept me grounded. We arrived at dusk, the strip glittering in the distance like a false promise. The friend, a grizzled man named Ruiz, met us in a nondescript diner off the highway. He listened without interruption, then slid a folder across the table. I made some calls. The feds are interested, but you'll need to testify. Witness protection is on the table. Jasper's hand found my knee under the table. We do this together, he said. Ruiz raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. You two got something worth protecting? Yeah, I answered before Jasper could. We do. That night, in a safe house on the outskirts of town, the weight of the decision settled. Witness protection meant new names, new lives, possibly apart if the marshals decided it was safer. The thought of losing Jasper now felt worse than any bullet. We talked until the early hours, voices low on the couch. He told me about the day his father had thrown him out, how he'd sworn never to let anyone close enough to hurt him again. I told him about the college party where I'd almost kissed a guy and chickened out, carrying that regret for a decade. Each confession wove us tighter. When the conversation finally quieted, Jasper turned to me. Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm not letting go. This time I didn't wait. I closed the distance and kissed him, soft at first, then deeper, years of fear and longing pouring out in one moment. He kissed me back like he'd been waiting just as long. No rush, no panic, just truth. The turning point came at 3 a.m. A noise outside, tires on gravel. Ruiz burst into the room. They found us. Back door now. We ran through the desert night, the safe house erupting in gunfire behind us. Jasper pulled me behind a rock outcropping, breathing hard. Go. I'll draw them off. No, I said fiercely. We do this together or not at all. He looked at me, eyes bright even in the dark. Then run like hell. We sprinted across open ground toward a distant highway. Bullets kicked up sand around us. Jasper stumbled once, clutching his side, but kept moving. I grabbed his arm and hauled him forward. When we reached the road, a semi-truck slowed. The driver, a woman with kind eyes, motioned us inside without questions. Get in. I don't like bullies. We collapsed in the sleeper cab as the truck roared west. Jasper's wound was shallow, just a graze, but the blood on my hands made everything real. He leaned his head on my shoulder. We're still here, he whispered. Yeah, I answered, threading my fingers through his. We are. By morning we crossed into California. Ruiz had texted coordinates for a safe federal meeting point outside Los Angeles. The desert gave way to suburbs, then the sprawl of the city. We were exhausted, bloodied, and more alive than I'd ever felt. At the rendezvous, an anonymous office building, 2 federal agents waited. They took our statements, confirmed the Marconi connections, and offered protection. Jasper squeezed my hand the entire time. When they asked if we wanted separate placements, I looked at him and shook my head. Same program. Same life. They didn't argue. That afternoon, in a quiet hotel room paid for by the government, we finally let the exhaustion win. Jasper fell asleep with his head on my chest, and for the first time since the alley, I slept without nightmares. 3 months later, the trial was over. The Marconi family had crumbled under the evidence I provided, and the testimony of 2 other reluctant witnesses the feds had flipped. Witness protection gave us new names, simple ones, unremarkable, and a modest house in a quiet Oregon coastal town. Jasper took up photography again, selling prints online under his new identity. I found work at a small accounting firm where no one asked too many questions. Life wasn't perfect. My parents still didn't know the full truth. We'd sent one careful letter explaining I was safe and in love, leaving the details for another day. My sister visited once, hugged Jasper like he'd always been family, and promised to keep our secret until we were ready. The nightmares still came sometimes, but Jasper was always there, steady as the ocean outside our window. One evening we walked the beach at sunset, shoes in hand, waves licking our ankles. Jasper stopped and turned to me, the wind ruffling his hair. "Remember the night we met?" "How could I forget?" I laughed. "You saved my life in a diner." He smiled, then grew serious. "You saved mine too, Benjamin." Or whatever we're calling ourselves these days. We stood there as the sky burned orange and pink, hands linked, the weight of everything we'd survived settling into something lighter. Love hadn't erased the scars, but it had given us the strength to carry them together. Later, back on our porch with mugs of tea, Jasper pulled me close. "We made it," he said simply. "Yeah," I answered. "We did." The journey hadn't been clean or easy. There had been misunderstandings, betrayals, moments I'd almost given up. But every hard choice, every sacrifice, had led here, to a life where I no longer hid who I was. Where loving another man wasn't a secret, but the foundation we stood on. True or false? Can love between 2 men truly conquer the dangers of the world and the prejudices of society?